good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday, May 12th, 2026. I'm your hostess, Felicia. Good to see you. Good morning. Mm. Nice hot cup of tea this morning. I've got my usual mix of, well, my new mix, not my usual mix, of the Earl Grey and, the Lady Grey and Black Cherry, along with a mix of honey leaf and hibiscus. I had to think about that for a minute. So good morning to you all. Good morning. Good morning. For those of you who are here for the video response, we will get to that. We'll get to that just as soon or as quickly as I possibly can. But you know, this is 7 o'clock in the morning. We gotta get the old brain going first. So we'll talk about some presuppositional nonsense. I'm going to be watching the video on this side of the screen, so I'm not going to be looking directly at you the entire time. I do apologize, but we'll get there in a minute. It's not a very long video. It's not a very difficult video, but usual rules apply. There is a Discord link. You're more than welcome to join the Discord, chat for a little bit. There is a show stage if, for some reason, you'd like to come in and barrage my eardrums. I don't really do the debate thing. This isn't really about debate. This is about analyzing things from my own perspective, from our perspective, from a relational atheism perspective, my little hobby atheism. And we do have I don't think we actually have limitations today on either the comments or the chat. Normally, I do have the chat limited. I want to see where things sort of end up. Because I've been pretty strictly limiting the chat lately. But hopefully, maybe we can keep the actual topic on, focused about what we're discussing. And then this is a space for both theists and atheists, so you're more than welcome to stop by, say hi. This is the hour that I do before before I go to work. In case you're wondering about the title, it is not me placing anyone in an epistemic armbar. It is it's a joke about the video I'm responding to because they claim to be putting atheists in an epistemic armbar. So relax. I'm not trying to be aggressive. I'm just having a little fun with an opossum. That's all. So hello, JP. Hello, Jessica. Good to see both of you in the chat. And hello to the rest of you sort of chilling out there. It's good to see you. It's been a very long time since I've read the writings of St. Maximus, the Confessor, or St. Gregory of Nicaea, or Nyssa, I should say. I am confident that they would disprove any version of presuppositionalism. Presup's interesting. Presup's very interesting because it's not so much that I don't think necessarily that presup is. I don't think necessarily people are wrong for latching on to presup. I think presup is wrong rationally, is incorrect, right? But I don't think people are necessarily irrational for latching onto it as a form of argumentation. At least internally between different faiths, it's kind of weird when presuppositionalism comes to that point where they're all basically agreeing that God is some sort of metaphysical truth. It gets kind of messy, kind of weird. Anyway, that being said, it's weird logically to speak about presuppositionalism, and because I understand where people come from when it comes to presup, right? Like, and I understand where people come from when it comes to like things of like the laws of logic. What does reasoning come from? Morals. I'm trying to think of what other transcendental truths, things like that. And so it's, I understand why people sort of latch onto it because the idea of abstractions tends to sort of float around as like this spooky mystical thing and not necessarily something that brains just do. So it's interesting. The other thing that's weird about presup is that it does take this mentality of feeling like you've figured out God. It's a very weird mentality to be like, I figured out a property of the omnipotent, omniscient being, and I don't really know how to feel about that. I mean, personally, as an atheist, I enjoy whatever the hell you want to enjoy, I guess, but it just seems kind of weird to have that sort of hubris, if you will. Um, it's just kind of strange to me. I don't really know why precepts think they found a property of God when it's just a property, when at most they've found a property of reality, and so they have to do a whole bunch of cartwheeling around minds and stuff. And today's precept we're responding to is, oddly enough, an orthodox presuppositionalist metaphysical idealist. Now, if that string of words sounded weird to you, it sounded weird to me too. But he's an Orthodox Christian who is a presuppositionalist. He uses this particular argument is going to be the argument from reason, this particular version of presuppositionalism. And he's also a metaphysical idealist, which is, it latches into the presuppositional posture that he has fairly well, but it creates tensions within orthodoxy, some serious tensions within orthodoxy, because orthodoxy is very, very strictly literal about physicalism and, well, not physicalism, but about the physical creation, the physical resurrection of Jesus. It's very, very, well, orthodox. um, and so that's a very weird sort of thing. I haven't gone through all of his videos trying to find out how he reconciles metaphysical idealism with orthodoxy, because if you're not really aware, metaphysical idealism is kind of like, what's the best way to put it? It's kind of like the idea that reality is fundamentally mind and not necessarily physical. Good morning, Demi Bear. Good to see you. Even when I was a Catholic, I thought presuppositionalism was nonsense. Even when I was a Catholic, I thought presup was nonsense, because when I was a Catholic, I was taught that in the Thomistic framework of the Alpha and the Omega, from the Alpha to the Omega. So you have to start with the premise of trying to say that you can get to the Alpha in any discernible sense, and then you have to move from the Alpha to the Omega. And that was kind of the thing that, like, really broke me for Catholicism, was that you can't do it in Thomistic metaphysics cleanly without the catechism. So the entire framework of Thomistic metaphysics relies fundamentally on faith. It's kind of weird to me, but um, it's really it's really interesting. His argument is going to be not necessarily self-defeating, but it is definitely going to be more of an argument less against atheists and more of an argument against anyone that's not a metaphysical idealist. And this is where I diverge from metaphysical idealism very strongly. Um, I don't hold to the notion that abstracts are things necessarily in the real physicalist sense. I hold that abstracts are concepts or thoughts that are shared among people and communicated loosely and kind of ill-defined sometimes. Um, and so this is where me and metaphysical idealists really, really part ways. I don't hold that reality is a mind or mind-like in structure and nature. So it's interesting. So you can see why he's a presuppositionalist. He thinks things like logic and reason and stuff like that require a mind. The universe is a mind, therefore God's mind, all that stuff. I mean, that's this really sloppy, loose, straw man version of his position, but why don't we get to it, right? Why don't we get to it? Hey, Dusk fan, good to see you. Dusk Frame, good to see you. Ideal is not strictly presuppositional; it's oxymoronic to be both. I agree. I don't. If I stated that idealism is presuppositionalism, I apologize. I did not mean to say that. Idealism is not presuppositionalism. It is understandable how you can come to be a metaphysical idealist or think you're a metaphysical idealist if you're a presuppositionalist. It's also understandable to be in the world of being a metaphysical idealist while linking with orthodoxy and then latching on to presuppositionalism as like the life raft that somehow keeps your orthodoxy afloat with your metaphysical idealism. It's weird. I'm not here to really dissect this guy's particular worldview. I'm really here to dissect the video, but anyway, let's get to the video. It's what you guys are here for, right? We'll do the video. Those of you who are here for the video can leave after that and then yell at me or tell me how stupid I am, whatever, you know. That's just how we roll there. So, let's go and find out what happened to my video. Where's my video? My video's gone. Hang on, 1 second. I need to get my one question for pre-sup video back up. I don't know what happened. It disappeared. Why did it disappear? It's gone. What happened to my video? Where's my video? Oh, there it is. Okay.
Every debate
cool.
with an atheist eventually reaches a single, unavoidable moment. A moment where they must either abandon reason itself or abandon their own worldview. I call this the epistemic armbar, and once it's locked in, there is no escape. This video isn't about fossils or DNA, or which side has more scientists on their team. Those are surface level distractions. At the foundation of every argument is a single question. Why is reason itself possible in your worldview?
So reason itself is just an abstraction that we ascribe to a series of things that we do, not necessarily a thing unto itself. So yes, he's Australian, Jessica, I'm sorry. But we'll get into that.
If an atheist can't answer that, they've lost before the debate even begins. The entire chokehold begins with the simplest, most universally recognized law in philosophy, the law of non-contradiction. Put simply, something cannot both be and not be at the same time in the same sense.
Well, that's
Every
interesting.
atheist watching this video just relied on that law to even understand my sentence. If you deny it, language collapses, argument collapses, your very comment becomes meaningless noise.
Well, now here's the problem, though. And his entire argument is going to be, his entire argument is structured around this. But here's the problem. The law of non-contradiction is specifically deals with, or specifically lives in a very, it lives in a very determinate system, I guess, right? So, like, non-contradiction exists, is applicable in determinate systems. So if you have determinate propositions that can be cleanly labeled yes, no, true, false, you can have the law of non-contradiction. The problem is that classical logic, and this is the reason why we have different systems of logic, actually has its limits. So classical logic is limited in scope. It's not a universally binding, as this man will say, aspect of reality. There are limitations to classical logic, and different forms of logic are applied. So the law of non-contradiction isn't necessarily false. It's that it stops being applicable when systems become indeterminate. It's maybe like undefined or inapplicable when the proposition itself has no determinate truth value, or the system itself isn't even capable of determinism. It's a purely indeterminate system that you're working in. So this really depends on what you're talking. If you're speaking purely at the macro level, yes, it works, but non-contradiction is emergent from a more basal, indeterminate logical system, if you want to call it that. Anyway, let's continue.
So I'll ask them the question directly. Is the law of non-contradiction universally binding, yes or no?
No. It's not universally binding because that's a loaded phrase. that's an absolutely loaded phrase. A proposition, the law of non-contradiction says that I don't know if this is the exact phrasing, but it says that a proposition cannot be both true and false at the same time, in the same sense, under the same interpretation. That part is really important to the law of non-contradiction, and everybody who makes this argument glosses over it. Okay? The whole locking mechanism of the law of non-contradiction is at the same time, in the same sense, in the same interpretation. Without that, this is just word soup. Is the law of non-contradiction universally binding? It depends on what you mean by universally, but generally speaking, if you're talking about all of reality at all times, no, it's not, because we observably have indeterminate systems and indeterminate forms of logical systems. So it can't be universally binding. It's binding inside any system where propositions have determinate meanings and truth values, but that doesn't make it magic. Like, it's not some immaterial floating object over reality. Contradiction breaks coherent assertion, prediction, and communication at the macro level as we understand it. Fine. Problem being, some of those things that we rely on, that we think of as these larger abstractions, are inapplicable themselves in other indeterminate systems. So, like, what are we talking about here? Are you talking about, is the law of non-contradiction applicable to me in the morning as of the proposition is Felicia drinking a cup of tea? Sure, I am drinking a cup of tea. Technically, that's false, because I am not currently drinking the cup of tea, but now I am. So you see how that works? How the law of non-contradiction works now at the macro level? But then when you get to, say, an indeterminate system, well, what is non-contradiction in indeterminate? It's not false. It's not wrong. It's not incorrect. It's just, it's not a definite thing. So it's really weird to have this. It's really weird to have this statement of it has to be universally binding. It has classical logic has its limits. So why are you demanding that it be universally binding? Can you demonstrate that it's universally binding in all possible cases? No, you can't. Nobody can. By the way, the meme is ridiculous. I agree.
And this is where the panic begins.
I'm not
From
panicked.
here, the atheist only has two options. Option A, they say no, the law of non-contradiction is not universally binding. In that case, contradictions can both be true.
No. That's the false dilemma you're presenting. And this is where presuppers go wrong all the time. Presenting false dilemmas does not mean that you're correct in your assessment. You've presented this false dilemma because you haven't considered that the laws of classical logic have limitations. Like, you refusing to consider that the laws of classical logic are somehow not these absolute immaterial platonic forms is probably the most dishonest presentation, probably the most dishonest thing about presuppositionalism, because you want to argue that the law of non-contradiction or the law of excluded middle or the law of identity are all somehow like absolutist in every applicable sense. But you don't want to address the limitations that these logical systems have. That these logical systems, by the way, that we've come up with to describe regularities. Like, you have to understand, this question sounds powerful because because he's treating the law of non-contradiction as if it applies directly to reality itself, right? Rather than the law of non-contradiction applies to propositions with fixed meanings and determinate truth values. So you're presenting this weird false dichotomy of either, if you say no, therefore everything you say is gibberish, but you're not acknowledging that the universality of this is limited in functionality. We work in systems, we work in theories, we work in conjectures that are indeterminate. Let me ask you this. Scientific hypothesis comes out. It's backed by some evidence, it's refuted by some other evidence. Is Is the potential developing theory from this true or false? It can't be both, right? It has to be both. It has to be either true or false. So what is it? It's it's indeterminate. That's what it is. It's neither true. It's neither not true nor not false. It's not either one of those things. It is an undefined assertion at the moment. It's like, I don't know. It's very weird to assert that everything needs to have a truth value, which is what you're basically asserting here when you say that the law of non-contradiction is universally binding. You're saying that everything has to have a truthiness to it. What is the truthiness of some things that just aren't known yet, or cannot be known until some sort of measurement is taken or something is forced to happen? If you see a monkey in a field, and you know the monkey's going to do something, but because biological beings naturally need to do things, otherwise, I mean, including up to and including, just falling over and dying, what is the monkey going to do? You don't know. How do you find out what the monkey's going to do? You can wait around and find out, sure. Sure, but until the moment the monkey does something, it's not doing anything. It's just sitting there. So what? What's the truth value to that? It's weird to say that the law of non-contradiction is some sort of universally binding thing. There's actually better arguments to be made with reason itself rather than the law of non-contradiction. I feel like the arguing from the law of non-contradiction is like kind of the weaker of the presup openings. You could do a law of excluded middle. The reason you want to avoid the law of excluded middle is because you have to start arguing over classical logic versus quantum logic. And that's when you start getting into really the mechanical woods of presuppositionalism, where the presuppositionalist probably doesn't want to defend the idea of there's no way to have a universally binding set of logical laws. It's a pretty interesting little. It's a pretty interesting little proof. I forgot what it's called. Oh, there's a mathematical proof. Not a mathematical proof. There's I believe, an analytic proof. I forget what it's called, that shows that given all of the propositions of various forms of logical systems that we have, it's actually impossible to have a coherent, universally binding set of logic laws, which is really interesting. So to sit there and claim that the law of non-contradiction is universally binding across um, all states, all logical laws, all logical systems, it's really weird, man. It's really weird. Um, it's like, anyway. Let's keep going. The video is really short. It's only got 2 minutes left.
Debate is over. Their own argument is now both true and false at the same time.
No, again, the system that we operate in is stabilized. And I hate to keep pausing like this, but the system we currently operate in at the macro level is fairly stable. I am here right now. Great, that's true. I am not there. That is also true. The electron is here right now. Kinda, statistically. The electron is also there right now. Kinda, statistically. It gets really weird when things get indeterminate and fuzzy. So now we want to apply this to our macro level world. Fine. Do you want to apply this to everything with indeterminate states, or states that exist purely in statistical realms? Like, or again, you're the one that made the claim that this is universally binding. So this has to be universally binding of both across not just a macro level explanation of things, but statistical explanation of things. Let me ask you this. Let me try and phrase this the right way. You live in a population that has a high risk percent chance of contracting a disease relative to the rest of the population. You haven't been tested for this disease, but you live within that population. Do you have the disease? I mean, statistically speaking, it's pretty likely that you do. Let's just say it's something ridiculously high, like an 80% of the population has this disease. Statistically speaking, you would have that. You would likely be considered to be at risk of having the disease, but do you have the disease until you've determined that indeterminate state? You can't say that the law of non-contradiction applies. You see what I'm saying? Like I'm trying to relate this to you in a way where it makes sense because the proposition hasn't been determined yet. So you can't have the law of non-contradiction be applicable. So it can't be universally applicable. Do we get it yet? Like it's so hard to for somebody that comes from an absolutist point of view, trying to explain things like why this is a bad argument for presuppositionalism is so difficult because I know they're locked into the idea that the universe is a mind. But I want to get to the rest of his video.
Nothing they say has binding force because they've destroyed the very rules of thought. So they usually pick option B. Yes, the law of non-contradiction is universally binding.
I just spent the last however long debating that, but okay.
But now they have a far bigger problem. They must explain why an immaterial, universal, unchanging law exists in a materialist, purposeless universe.
Well, that's not a problem because you're the one who's now made the assertion that this immaterial thing exists fundamentally as part of the universe, as some sort of property of reality. You're the one with the problem. You've demonstrated if you get the atheist to accept that the law of non-contradiction is universally binding, you are now left with the burden of proof of proving that this is part of reality, that it's not just a product of minds. Because as far as I'm concerned, logic, reason, the law of non-contradiction, all of this is not a property of reality. It's a description of stable relations that have emerged over the eons. We have minds that think in abstracts. We then take these abstracts and we transmit those abstracts verbally to other agents who then also think in abstracts. The law of non-contradiction is just something that floats around in our heads. We say the cup is not broken. It can't be both broken and not broken. The cup is not broken. Fine. We've noticed that, but that's not a property of reality. The proposition the cup is not broken is not sitting around as a property of reality. You have to demonstrate that the proposition itself exists as this weird platonic form, and presuppers never do this. They never demonstrate that it exists in this platonic form. They never demonstrate that it exists fundamentally as an aspect of reality. They just demonstrate that the laws of logic at the macro level tend to be applicable across a wide array of things, and then say, because it's applicable to a wide array of things, it must therefore be applicable to everything at all times. And therefore, since it's applicable to everything at all times, it is a fundamental property of reality. Therefore, since it's a property of reality, it must be, and minds think about it, it must come from mind, therefore, God. It's a wild series of leaps once you break down the actual moves they make. And it's so frustrating to speak to a presupper like this, because they don't want to prove Platonic forms. Nobody wants to prove Platonic forms. Nobody wants to demonstrate Platonic forms. Because the demonstration of a Platonic form inherently means you have an outside observer's access to reality, and you can point to all of reality and say, yes, this is an absolute property of reality. Just because something seems to be applicable across a wide array of things does not mean it's applicable to everything. Gravity is applicable to a wide array of things, a vast array of things. practically everything in the observable universe, more than likely beyond the observable universe, is subject to the laws of gravity. But here's the problem. Once you start to break down below the macro level, we don't really have a unifying theory of quantum gravity that works cleanly and bridges cleanly to general relativity. So gravity isn't, as we understand it, to be universally applicable. We suspect that gravity will emerge from a quantum proposition, but we don't have that proposition yet. We suspect it. The truth value of that is therefore also indeterminate. So does gravity apply to the quantum level? Probably. But how does it apply? We don't necessarily have a great clean bridge from quantum to general relativity. So we can't just say gravity is universally binding, at least not yet. Maybe one day we'll be able to say that as a property of reality. Or maybe one day we'll be able to say, yeah, well, maybe gravity doesn't necessarily apply in the exact same way we understand it right this second to things like electrons and photons, quarks and leptons. Maybe there is some fundamental law that we're missing, that we don't understand yet, and we have to figure that out. Or we have to figure out a way to bridge the gap between the quantum and the macro level. Gravity is far more a fundamental property of reality. And that's what that's what the problem with the presuppositional argument is. You're making the argument that logic is fundamental to reality. But you haven't demonstrated that. You've demonstrated that logic is fundamental to minds. Sure. Logic is fundamental to the way you and I work. Logic is fundamental to the way minds operate. We operate on logic at the high abstract level. But then we have to start drilling down. Does every mind operate fundamentally logically? Is it all a series of XOR and not gates? Is it all a series of indeterminate systems that come together and coalesce into a stabilized pattern? Maybe that's what it is. Maybe logic is just the way we're able to operate within reality reliably. But then we have to start asking, what is logic? Because if human logic is not universally transferable to opossum logic, and then it's not really a law of logic. It's just a law we came up with to help us navigate things at the abstract level and not necessarily at the opossum sees dark shadow, hides in fear because it thinks it's a hawk level. It has to be universally applicable for it to be universally applicable, for it to be part of the universe. You think the opossum gives a shit about the law of non-contradiction? Just out of curiosity.
Where does it come from? Why does it bind all thinkers everywhere for all time? And this is the point where every single atheist I've debated either stalls, deflects, or melts down. As an example, the atheist will claim, the law of non-contradiction is just a description of our observations. And that's when I would say, is it universally binding, yes or no?
We go back to the universally binding yes or no. We go back to the script. And the script is designed to get you to be into his little pipeline, but he refuses to acknowledge, once again, that universally binding is pretty big, sloppy language. And once you start drilling down on what universal means, we have problems.
And by this point, they usually melt down or vanish. And here's how it plays out in real time. An atheist I debated recently claimed that logic was just descriptive, like humans merely observing patterns in nature. And so I pressed him. Is the law of non-contradiction universally binding, yes or no? He dodged, he shifted topics, he accused me of bad motives.
I mean, you do have bad motives. Your motive is that you're trying to enforce metaphysical real idealism. Metaphysical. You're trying to enforce metaphysical idealism in a conversation that's about God, when both of you haven't even agreed upon a framework to argue from. So yeah, you're being dishonest. You're no longer arguing about God from your presuppositional framework. You're arguing about metaphysical idealism versus physicalism. You're not arguing honestly. You've changed the argument fundamentally. So that's not being honest. You are in fact being dishonest. You just because you refuse to acknowledge that in your debate doesn't mean the atheist isn't wrong in calling you out for it. Because you're the one shifting things here. You're no longer having a conversation about God. Just because you've personally linked God to your metaphysical idealism doesn't mean the atheist has to accept your metaphysical idealism framework. You still have the burden of proof to demonstrate that we should argue from metaphysical idealism in the first place. And that's really what you're doing. That's the sneaky move you're making with this universally binding question. It's not the gotcha you think it is. It's not the universal sort of attack you think it is. It's not the universal framework you think it is. It is literally you fogging up the playing field with metaphysical idealism and then saying, "Oh, it must be God." So you're fogging up the whole debate. The whole real debate you're having is metaphysical idealism versus physicalism. That's the debate you're having versus naturalism versus physicalism versus everything that's not metaphysical idealism. That's the real debate you're having. So when you lure people in with your little fishing lure and you say, let's talk about God, you're not actually making that debate. Underneath it, your machinery is the metaphysical idealism versus physicalism or naturalism debate. It literally has nothing to do with God whatsoever. You are asking someone who doesn't subscribe to metaphysical idealism to argue within your framework. That's why you're dishonest. That's why this argument is dishonest. That's why your debate is dishonest. That's why people get angry at you. If you were just honest about what you were debating, you would get far less people interested in debating you. Far less.
What he never did was answer the question itself, because either answer destroys his worldview. To my silent readers, here's what you need to see clearly. The atheist never escapes epistemology. Every time they try to talk about evidence, or fossils, or morality, they are borrowing tools they cannot explain. Logic, truth, reason itself, these aren't free. They must be grounded in something ultimate.
No. You only need grounding if you are dealing purely in metaphysical. If you're dealing purely in the metaphysical, you kind of need grounding because now you need to like come back to reality. That's kind of what grounding is. It's not really, but it's kind of what grounding is, trying to pull you back to reality here. Because dealing in the metaphysical is just dealing in the abstract and arguing from the abstract constantly. Truth is just a statement about propositions that causal agents make and about observations about reality. Logic is just a system or process we use to determine things. That's it. It's just an abstract. Being an abstract doesn't require grounding. Reasoning is the colloquial broad umbrella term definition we give to all of the processes we do in our lives. Reasoning is a combination of logic, biological automation, emotions, and emotional actions. This is all part of the broad definition of reasoning. But a broad definition doesn't make it metaphysical. It just makes it this abstract concept to describe a whole bunch of states that are happening. You don't need grounding for that. But again, you're arguing and you're expecting people to argue from the metaphysical idealist standpoint. I don't give a shit about the metaphysical idealist because I have to poop in the morning. You could think reality is a mind, but if there's a mind cooking all of this up and making me poop in the morning, the mind sucks. Plain and simple. The mind's perverted as hell. The mind's weird. It's such a weird sort of statement to say that reality itself is mind-like. If you think reality is a mind or mind-like, fine, you can hold to that, but then don't argue with me about your proposition that God is real from your mind-like stance. You're going to have to approach me from a common playing ground that we both agree with. We don't agree on this very basic fundamental argument here. So that's the real argument you want to have. Not does God exist because logic and reason and all this shit is abstract.
Without that grounding, every statement collapses into contradiction. So here's my challenge to every atheist watching this. Stop running. Stop deflecting. Stop hiding behind.
See, here's the thing. You keep wanting to say stop deflecting. The problem is your epistemic armbar is not an epistemic armbar about atheists. And this is really what the point I'm trying to get home. You're trying to force people into your framework. It's so dishonest to do that. At least start from the common ground. Start from the common ground and have the discussion from there. Because if you're just having the discussion in the middle of the discussion, you're a metaphysical idealist, I'm a naturalist or a materialistic naturalist or a physicalist or a emergentist or anything like that, and you open with the question, does God exist? Well, we have to talk about the shared common ground we have first. You want to have the debate. We need to first have the debate on what we even agree with first, before we can even discuss anything outside of reality. We have to agree on what reality is to begin with. We don't even agree there. And then you want to force people into your framework. This is why your debates, this is why you haven't posted in 7 months either. But this is why your debates ended with people just being mad and walking away and not talking to you anymore. This is a nonsense debate. You're literally speaking gibberish at people. And then you're demanding people conform to your framework and conform to your answers. Well, no, I'm not going to conform to your answers or conform to your framework. I'm not a metaphysical idealist. I don't think the universe is a mind. Sorry, guy, you're going to have to fucking demonstrate that shit to me. I have a lot more evidence that we live in a physical reality where minds think crazy things than I do have any sort of inclination that Platonic forms of reason, logic, and truth and morals exist. I have a lot stronger reason to believe that everything is a result of minds doing complicated mind things in a very complicated network of minds called the human species, than I do think that things float out in the vacuum of space as untouchable ethereal things with no real physical implications other than how we think. Which is a really weird thing to even propose, that you're saying that logic has real implications, but they're not physical implications, they're implications on how we think. So you're now forced into this weird position of the universe is a mind. It has these properties that we call reason, logic, truth, morals, and all this shit. And they don't have physical reality. They don't have demonstrable interactions like gravity. They just float out there, and they are utterly and totally incomprehensible, indifferent to matter, essentially. But they're not indifferent and incomprehensible to other minds. You have no bridge between this weird metaphysical idea that you have and what the mind does. My bridge is that there is no metaphysical idea of logic and reason. That doesn't exist as a floaty, ghosty, spooky thing. It exists as abstractions within minds. The grounding is the fact that it comes from minds. That's the grounding. The nonsense terminology that Philbros love to use but don't understand and misapply it constantly. So I at least can bridge my mind doing things with the ideas of logic and reason and morals and truth. Well, you have to reach out into spooky voodoo land and go, well, minds do mind things, so therefore the mind things must be connected to the mind thing. And therefore the mind thing must be God. It's a very strange argument. It really is.
Insults and distractions.
This is also why he doesn't do a lot of a lot of presuppositional content, because this is actually pretty piss poor for presuppositional content. There's a guy called Joel who's also kind of piss poor at presuppositional content at the Think Institute, but he's actually at least somewhat competent at argumentation. PMARS is a better presuppositional argumentation than this guy, and PMARS is PMARS is a special kind of dumb.
Answer the question directly. Is the law of non-contradiction universally binding? If no, debate ends now.
No, because there's your problem. I'll just say no, and you demand that the debate ends. Fine, I won't explain myself, but there you go. There's your problem, dude. That's not an epistemic armbar. That's you being a fedora-reading Reddit tier Christian, Orthodox Christian, going back on Discord and patting yourself on the back, going, "I won my debate, guys," without ever defining any of the terms or any of the ground rules of the debate. Yay me! I'm so good at this.
Your
Come on.
worldview collapses into incoherence. If yes, explain why an immaterial, universal law exists in a materialist, purposeless universe.
No, because again, you just keep making blanket assertion after blanket assertion. It's disgusting.
There is no third option. The epistemic armbar is locked in and there is no escape.
Just an utterly garbage argument. Utterly garbage argument. So the epistemic armbar in that case. The epistemic armbar in that case is forcing you into the position that you don't hold unless you do hold it, of metaphysical idealism. The position that things exist, that abstractions that we've come up with exist as spooky things out in the middle of nothing. And that because we have minds, by the way, this also naturally entails mind-body dualism, but they never really say that out loud unless they actually hold to mind-body dualism publicly. That necessarily entails that minds are floating around doing floaty mind things connected to the floating mind abstracts, and that the floating mind abstracts are part of the universe. And like, you haven't demonstrated any of that. That's the problem. You've taken the fuzzy, uncomfortable, I guess, concept of abstract ideas and abstract thoughts, and said, I'm not comfortable with that. Okay, I'm not comfortable with abstract thoughts. I'm not comfortable with abstract ideas. I think abstract ideas point to something outside of my mind. Okay, but reifying logic into a spooky immaterial object and then demanding that the atheist explain the object you invented is not an honest debate. It's not an honest question. What you really should be asking is, first, again, your worldview, your stance, your philosophic stance against the atheist philosophic stance, and then you need to start to debate, what is logic? What is reason? What are morals? What is truth? Because you haven't even come to those definitions yet. You've come to a debate with all of your presuppositions in tow, demanded with your epistemic armbar that the atheist account for them from your point of view, without demonstrating any of it, without coming to the table to negotiate any of the presuppositions of the debate, of the argument, and then being you mad, bro, when people don't play your fucking game. You want to run a presupposition, and here's the real weird thing about it. You're running a really weird version of Vantillian presuppositionalism, and your weird version of Vantillian presuppositionalism is like this bastardized version of Protestantism, which I don't even understand how you can hold to be orthodox and then try to borrow capital from the Protestant Vantillian, the Calvinist Protestant Vantillian presuppositionalism. And then you want to transform that and try to force people into your metaphysical idealism framework without ever coming to the table discussing, hey, these are the views I hold. Do you hold similar views? Can we debate something? Well, the only thing we can debate is physicalism or relationalism or emergentism or naturalism versus metaphysical idealism. Those are the only things we can debate. Or we can debate what is the nature of logic? What is the nature of reason? What is the nature of morals? What is the nature of truth? We could have those debates. But you're coming to a debate as an Orthodox Christian against an atheist and then demanding they account for things in your framework, in a framework that they don't hold, is the weirdest debate flex. The weirdest debate flex. What do we got going on here in the chat? Precept doesn't prove God, but it does show how traditional epistemology and theism share the same metaphysics, namely objective truth. Epistemology and theism share the same metaphysic of objective truth. I'm not really sure that's accurate. I don't really know that to be accurate. I can't necessarily comment on that. I don't also hold to objective truth. I don't also hold to truth being the highest value either. We could have that debate some other time though. I'm not really that deep into philosophy. I'm a senior software engineer, so I'll have to look into that comment. I do apologize. Healthy conversation going on here between JP and ASDF, though. The Kenthoven school of telling anecdotes. I was brilliant. The atheist had no response to my genius. I agree, Jessica. That's what the whole video was. The whole video was, I am a genius and you have no response to my assertion. Yeah, because I'm not arguing from a metaphysical idealist point of view. I'm not responding from a metaphysical idealist framework, and you're demanding I give one and give an account for your framework, for your worldview. Which, by the way, the reason traditional Van Tillian precept works so well is because it ties together, it clouds a lot of stuff together in a way that is conversational but also demanding that everything come back to God, to being grounded in God. The orthodoxy precept we just listened to was a fucking piss poor precept. It was probably some of the worst precept I've ever heard in my life. Yeah, and traditional Van Tillian precept is also pretty garbage. Anybody who argues that Darth Dawkins, Joel from Think Institute, Jay Dyer, Jim Bob, they all secretly, they don't want to admit it, but they all secretly are actually arguing the millennia old argument of Platonic forms versus that's absolute horseshit. What are you talking about? But they just don't want to admit it. Because they shifted the goalpost from Platonic forms existing independently to we have God. Woo. Okay, yeah, it's still a Platonic form, and you're still proclaiming some sort of special knowledge of God. That God's nature is this, God's nature is that, God's nature is X, Y, and Z. When where is your grounding for that? Where's your justification for that? Where is your ecclesiastical support for that, for those statements? But they never want to discuss that because they want to keep the conversation strictly outside their framework. Because if they don't keep the conversation strictly outside their framework, then the internal coherence starts to look a little weird. But the orthodoxy precept, this particular one was just so bad. It wasn't even orthodoxy precept. It was metaphysical idealist precept, which is so weird that you try to force people to give answers in your framework, and then feel some sort of sense of righteousness for having the atheist walk away from such a dishonest and bad faith conversation. Like, why would you have such a dishonest and bad faith conversation in the first place? Like, what do you think that's proving to anybody besides your friends on Discord, besides your friends on Reddit? What exactly are you proving to anyone outside of your circle? You're not. You're just proving that you can have dishonest conversations. I can have dishonest conversations too. Ooh, the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. Is the Blue Eyes White Dragon, Dusk? Video comes across like he's replaying an argument in the shower so he looks cool in front of the shampoo bottles. Hey, Dusk, listen, here's the thing. Okay, Dusk? I do that every morning, all right? I like looking cool in front of my shampoo bottles. Of which I have many, by the way. I've been using my good expensive ones because I have a hair appointment soon. So, I'm trying to get prepped for that, trying to get rid of the grays here. Zip Zoop, good to see you. We're doing well this morning, very well this morning. Hope everyone else is doing well this morning. But that is really my presentation on why this particular precept is. How and why would gravity be more of an epistemological grounding than logic when gravity can only be grasped by logic itself? That statement is incoherent without logic. Polemics. You don't need logic to grasp grounding, to grasp gravity. You need logic to describe gravity in a way that is coherent and can be transferred to other thinking agents, but gravity in itself is a. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I've got allergies. But gravity in itself is a physical thing that happens. So you want to start arguing about how logic comes from reality. I mean, the only way you can do that for me is my assertion is that logic is just descriptions of stable patterns that we see. It's things minds do and observe. We observe statistical norms. That's all logic is just the observation of norms. You're trying to use logic as this thing that floats out in space. Okay, great. I'm saying logic is a compression of what we observe. It's a very effective compression. It's a very effective tool. But you saying that, but you have to link. So here's the thing. You have to link the observation that an apple is not an orange with that being a necessary property of physical reality. The proposition the apple is not an orange, I hold, is not a property of reality. It's not a property of the universe. It's an observation of minds. I need to see some sort of demonstration, some sort of experiment that says that propositions and propositional logic are properties of reality, are measurable, distinct properties of reality. As I could drop this glass and I can measure the effects of gravity. Do you need gravity? Do you need logic to have planets in orbit? Did gravity exist sans minds? Gravity as a concept, gravity as a word, gravity as a definition, gravity as a measurement, no. But the actual physical thing that happens, did that exist sans minds? Does that exist sans a mind? Did the Earth, well, it's not the Earth. Yeah, well, no, did the Earth rotate around the sun before minds developed? That's far more fundamental. What that's far more. She said that gravity was more of an epistemic foundation than logic. I was referring to the law of non-contradiction, not logic. So I don't know. To not believe in objective truth is to not share the same framework as the precept, as you say. But many people, including atheists, do believe in objective truth. Eric, that's fine. You can believe in objective truth. I'm not saying objective truth is or is not a thing. For me, I don't see a reason to hold to objective truth. I don't see a reason to necessarily debate on objective truth. I don't necessarily think we can find objective truth. I think we could find good enough truth for propositions. I don't know, but if we want to play like word games, we have to ask, what is objective true? What is objectively true? Are we talking about situational objectiveness? Are we talking about 1 + 1 = 2 in all instances? Objective truth? Or are we talking about the objective truth? Like, what are we talking about now? Because now we have to start digging deeper. Are we talking about a cat is a cat and a cat is not a dog as objectively true? Because now we're just playing word games with the word objective, and then I don't care. Are we talking about objective in mathematics has equations? Fine, but what do I care about that as an objective truth? That 1 + 1 = 2 in all systems where we define 1 + 1 = 2. What do I care if that's an objective truth or not? Do I care about objective truth as in the truth of reality? That's when I start to pump the brakes and I go, okay, great. So what's the objective truth then? Why are we trying to achieve objective truth? Is truth a value worth achieving? These are questions we don't debate. These are questions we don't ask. I don't necessarily hold that truth is the highest value. So I don't know. There's a lot of word games when it comes to online debates like this. And it's evidenced by the video we just watched. There's just a whole bunch of word games to try and get people to argue from his framework, which is kind of presuppositionalism in a nutshell. It was just kind of poorly done. So, yeah, don't let yourself get caught in an epistemic armbar. That's switching categories from epistemology to ontology. That's only saying that gravity would exist without logic. That doesn't answer what's more of an epistemic foundation between the two. Oh, I'm so sorry, No Limit Polemics. Did I confuse you with the notion that I'm a philosopher? No, I don't care. How's that sound? Now I'm going to switch the category even more. Now I don't care because now you want to Philbro railroad me into your bullshit. So now we just don't care anymore because I'm not interested in I'm not interested in doing this pre-sub bullshit. So you're gone, dude. You want to play pre-sub more about politically expedient things? Ugh. This is what the presup is talking about, or at least why the presup argument is important even to atheists. It's not important to me, though. I don't care. What I care about is that the argument itself is dishonest. The presup argument itself could be important. That's fine. I don't think it's important enough to really address. I think it's. I think the argument itself is dishonest, especially the way this video frames it. So if you're just gonna play Philbro railroading bullshit games with me, I'm just gonna ban you from the channel. Like if you don't want to actually have a conversation and you just want to be in metaphysical la la land, and instead you want to police me on epistemic versus ontology when I'm a senior software engineer, not a Philbro philosopher, we're just not going to play the game. We're going to have honest conversations, but you don't want to have honest conversations. No Limit Polemics. So I'm not going to deal with it. It's that simple. I think gravity is more fundamental than logic. Absolutely. I think gravity is absolutely more fundamental than logic, and I think you are just a presup nonsense. I find philosophy interesting. I don't really find philosophy all that interesting. I find the conversations interesting. I find the lack of honest conversation around philosophy interesting, and that's why I find this video interesting. So when if we're gonna start like debating ontology versus epistemology, and we want to start getting into the Philbro stuff, I'm just going to kick you out. I'm not really interested in it, dude. I'm just not. I'm just really not interested in it. What I'm in... excuse me. Sorry. Which part of logic is tool to test proposition isn't clear. Whatever. The streamer, what? He literally just said he didn't care about truth. No, I said I don't necessarily hold to objective truth, and I didn't say I didn't care about truth. Please don't misrepresent me. I said I don't think truth is necessarily the highest value. I didn't say I didn't care about it. But you don't really understand my position when it comes to that, and I do have a. All right. Well, I don't really have any time left, but I'll clarify this. I hold that survival is more important than truth. And that's how we've developed logic and reason, and the search for truth is through a system of survival that lets us have statistically coherent odds at continuing to survive. I think survival is the highest priority. I think reproduction is next to that. I think those are higher values in terms of how we actually live and how we actually function than truth. I don't think we actually function and live by truth. It's that simple. I actually asked you what is the highest value. Oh, there you go. My point. Survival, like mold, maggots, yeast, mosquitoes. I don't care about that at all. Well, I had a actual long conversation about this ASDF, and you're coming from a very privileged place where survival doesn't matter to you, and you don't care at all about that. I'm happy for you, but there are a ton of other people out there, a lot of people out there that don't care about truth nearly as much as they care about survival, and they exist in your own country. They exist in your own country, and you coming from such a privileged place that survival is no longer of value to you doesn't necessarily mean that survival isn't the highest value. Somebody who is homeless and looking for food scraps cares much more about survival than they care about the truth of propositions. Somebody who is in their reproductive prime trying to reproduce cares much more about reproducing than they care about truth. So while truth may be the highest value for you in the moment, I don't think necessarily when it comes to existing that it outranks survival or reproduction. I really don't. It's an extremely privileged position to think that survival is a solved thing. It's not important. No, it's absolutely important. What if I sing songs to the people about the people? I'm privileged because I have blue eyes and I go to the gym. Okay, that's weird. No, you're privileged because you're separated from the position. You're separated from the position of having to survive, of having to worry about where your next meal's coming from, where your next drink of clean water's coming from. You're privileged from the position of not having to worry about the person coughing across the street from you isn't going to spread some incurable deadly disease to you. That's the privilege you have. It's a great privilege that I have it too, but I just happen to recognize that survival is much more basal than truth. I'm hulked up and muscled. Truth is practical, not metaphysical. Yeah, I agree. But for lots of people, including atheists, truth is metaphysical, which is what connects them to theists. Oh, I agree. Well, Eric, this comes down to, and Ed was talking about it in his stream. We've spoken about it here, and I'm going to speak about it more tomorrow's stream. That boils down to religious residue. There is a lot of atheists in the online atheist community, online atheist culture, are ex-evangelicals who all ascribed to truth as the highest thing, and they never examined that or really contested that. You could look at Apologia, Matt Dillahunty. Pretty much all of the ex-evangelical atheists hold to truth as the highest value. Um, and they never question that. They never fight that. They never argue that. So, it's interesting. I argue from that, I guess I come from the position of, maybe we should feed the hungry before we give a shit about whether an apple is an orange or a man is a woman, or can a man be a woman or anything like that. I think maybe we need to worry about that before we need to worry about everything else. But I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm weird. Maybe I'm just weird. Not the Oh. But yeah, no, I understand why it's important to these atheists, but it's also why I think speaking out about this, speaking out about why I don't think truth is the highest value, is a necessary conversation to have. What else we got? I don't have to work. I have blonde hair. You don't have the same privilege I do. Yeah, okay. Truth is abstract, not metaphysical. I mean, Phantom X, it's a property of propositions. So yeah. Survival of the fittest means the survival of the most adapted. You have triple chin privilege, big eyebrow privilege. I'm sorry for that. I'd do anything to prevent that, but I can't. ASDF, are you just like... ASDF, I'm just not feeling I'm just not feeling it anymore, so you're gone. I'm just not feeling it anymore. I'm not gonna let you ruin my vibe, dude. I don't know what your deal is. I don't know what your deal was. I never said anything about that. I was saying more along the lines of being American, being in a first world country, having access to reliable clean water, having access to reliable food sources, that sort of privilege. But you wanna You want to start conflating that with everything and then start making fun of my third chin and start making fun of my weight problems? I don't know what your deal is, man, but I really hope you I really hope you screw your head on right, dude. That's just not uh I don't know, man. Ryan, you shouldn't let people rub off on you, might catch something. I don't know what that was about, man. That was weird. So, anyway. They're probably masturbating while chatting. Yeah, probably. Anyway, again, I don't hold the truth as the highest value. You're welcome to challenge me on that. Fine. I also don't really care about being Philbro railroaded by presuppositionalists either. If you want to have an honest conversation, if you want to just sit there and nitpick me about your Philbro bullshit, I don't care. Like you're gonna have to make honest assessments here, dude. What a loser! Probably very insecure about their own life. Whatever. We're all insecure about our lives, so those are really the rules. I'm not gonna let you ruin my vibe, man. You want to come here and have an honest conversation, have an honest conversation. But if you just want to be a philosopher and philosophize all day, well, you have to understand that my position is that philosophy, unless it is applied practically, is useless. So there you go. There's my position. If you're a philosopher of religion, you're completely and utterly useless, and probably shouldn't be tenured at Princeton. Let's be honest. Let's be perfectly honest. I think if you're a philosopher of religion, you're kind of wasting everyone's time. But if you're a philosopher of science, let's say, or you work in the philosophy of medicine, maybe the philosophy of computer science, things like AI, you work in things like that. It's pretty good to have these conversations and these arguments, especially about maybe consciousness, maybe what it means to be in pain, maybe what AI is, maybe what it means to damage or be damaged in an emotional sense to something like an AI. I think having those conversations now is important. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think having those philosophical or even metaphysical conversations about science and scientific experiments and hypotheses and things of that nature, I think that's also important. So, but what I don't think is important is getting lost in the philosophic fart huffing and the metaphysic fart huffing when you've decided, you know what, all this is true, and therefore I'm now going to reason my way to God, and I'm going to accept that logic must be universal and endearing. If you want to argue that logic is a property of the universe, it's a check mark on the universe's box. If you want to play that game, then you need to demonstrate it. But you can't demonstrate it. You can only argue about it philosophically. If you can only argue about something philosophically ever, and you can't demonstrate that it is a thing or that it causes harm or that it does something in reality, and you can't actually show that to be the case, you're wasting my time. I can show that gravity exists. I can't show that logic does something outside of a mind. So, whatever. Anyway, I am now 11 minutes late for work. That is the problem with doing a 7 a.m. live stream, is that I am never on time for work anymore. I am always late for work. So that's all the time I got for the stream, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. I knew opening the live chat was going to be a mistake. I wasn't really here to get into individual debates. I'm just not really interested in that. I'm not really interested in the individual debates here, because my overall point for this video was you're trying to put an epistemic armbar around somebody to force them to operate within your framework when you yourself haven't agreed to that, when they haven't agreed to that framework. But then you want to get into arguments about, is logic a property of the universe? Okay. What are we talking about? What is logic? What are you talking about? You're talking about an abstract. So yeah, you just want to distract and detract, and you want to sort of win your little brownie points. I concede. I definitely screwed up between epistemology and ontology, but you want to just play that Philbro railroad shit? I'm not going to play that with you, dude. I think gravity is more fundamental than logic. You have to speak to me on those terms. Anyway, that's all the time I got. See you tomorrow morning. Love you all. Peace.